Consistency does not feel sexy at all, but it is what has helped me get to my 1-year anniversary of podcasting. And also, I'm about to publish my 50th episode, which is coming out right after this one. And why that's a big deal? Because less than 10% of podcasters who start actually continue past that 10 episode mark, let alone that 50 episode mark. So if you've ever contemplated on creating video or audio content and are wondering about what are potentially some common challenges or opportunities that come with being a content creator, you'll want to tune into this episode as I give you a high-level overview of what I experienced. P.S. If it wasn't for tools like ChatGPT or Perplexity helping me do research and some of the writing, I probably would have struggled a lot more given the fact that I worked full-time and I have this whole entire production by myself. So again, if you've ever been curious, you'll want to tune into this episode. Let's dive in. Hi everyone, I just wanted to hop on here and celebrate 2 major milestones with you. The first one is the 1-year anniversary of the Leader Within podcast. And the second one is, right after this one, is going to be the 50th episode. And you may be wondering, why is that a big deal? Well, if you like stats or you like numbers like I do, one of the biggest things that I found out is that less than 10% of people who get started and have a podcast will make it to 10 episodes. And then as you get to the next bracket of roughly 50 episodes, less than 1% of individuals will get to that. And then when you get to the 100th episode, it's roughly 0.1% or so that make it to that extent. And so the fact that we're halfway there and that we're part of that 1% that is continuing to truck on and continue to invest into content creation, that's a freaking big deal. Especially when you got something to be like, I thought it'd be performing really great. And I've done my due diligence with SEO, etc., but it's actually doing pretty poorly. And then other times, people might not actively engage with your content, but then behind the scenes, they'll take the time to send you a message and let you know their thoughts. And that is not measured by what the public actually sees. So to everyone who's taken the time to support me, whether you actively repost, comment, like, send me a message, or you're one of the lurkers who pays attention to what's coming out, but haven't actively engaged, your time and attention means more to me than you'll know. And I can't wait to share with you in this 1-year anniversary episode some of the life updates that happened during this 1 year in terms of how it's impacted the trajectory of what I'm doing through this, some of the biggest challenges that I've faced as a content creator, and trying to make sure that I stay consistent and post weekly. And then I'll also share with you some of the things that you can expect moving forward and potentially some guests that I'm looking for, because I'm still working through a backlog of guests that I'm trying to edit through and everything, but I'm always on the lookout for individuals to collaborate with, especially if they do align with what it is that I'm trying to achieve, which is to amplify the voices of visible minorities and their allies who care about creating an environment that helps others unleash their potential so that they can achieve meaningful success while prioritizing well-being. So if you are a leader or a subject matter expert who provides insights to leaders, I want to chat with you to see if there's a fit for us to collaborate on the Leader Within. So before I wrap up this video, I'm going to dive into the biggest life events that has happened since I first launched this podcast. So going into the 3 major life events that happened in between when I first launched my podcast to this 1-year anniversary. The first one being, I got laid off. I don't know if you've ever experienced a layoff before, but I'm not going to go into depth of the experience in this video. If anything, I'll actually share it in my year-end reflection video so I can incorporate my biggest takeaways from my podcast series so far. Either way, I believe it's a serendipitous event because everything's meant to happen for a reason in life. So why resist it if it was potentially meant to be? Second thing, if you know anything about me, you know that I am obsessed with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And I got my blue belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So similar to what I mentioned when it comes to creating content and how less than 10% of podcasters who start get to their 10th episode and get past that 10th episode, there's a parallel to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu where less than 10% of people who start Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu actually stick it through until they achieve their blue belt. So that in itself is a milestone. And I've drawn so many different leadership and life parallels between me as a practitioner and competing and then into business, my corporate career and content creation that I'm actually excited to share some of that with you as I continue to put content out there. And then the third major life event is when I got laid off, I went all in trying to figure out, okay, what kind of business do I actually want to grow in this new phase? Do I still want to continue down the path of HR? And what type of consulting do I actually want to position myself as? And I went through so many iterations. And I just covered 3 major life events that happened. But now I want to switch gears and focus on the opportunities that consistent content creation and building up an audience can afford an individual. And I'm only speaking from my experience. The first one is an exchange of services. And what do I mean by that? So whether you identify a conference, workshop, training, certification course, whatever maybe that you want to be able to attend, and you happen to have an audience that aligns with these organizers' target audience, you now have leverage to go up to them and be like, hey, I'm just curious. If I were to have a complimentary ticket or a complimentary seat to blank, and then in exchange, I will create content and talk about the value that I gained out of it and the value that others could potentially gain from this, would this be worth it to you? And most of the time, people will probably say yes. Because if you think about it, when a company markets to an individual, how likely is that individual going to ignore that ad versus if they hear it from someone they trust? Similar to how we look at referrals for business opportunities or job opportunities. So when you have social proof that you are engaging an audience and you're consistently delivering value, this is where, again, those different conference organizers, workshop organizers, or even training certification companies are wanting to entertain that conversation because they're like, you're not just another person off the street that doesn't have any credibility and I don't know what value you can deliver to me. The second piece of it is going to events. People have recognized me more than they otherwise would have remembered me. And the reason being is because I'm constantly popping up on their feed without having to actively engage them for coffees or messaging with them or whatever. My face is like unconsciously in a lot of these individuals' heads. And I think that's a good thing in a sense that when it comes to success in itself, working hard alone is not sufficient. You have to have that network. You have to have that community that backs you. Other than that, you can do great work, but if no one knows about it, how are they supposed to actually come to you? Versus when you create content and you're consistent about it, then individuals by default will remember you. And that shouldn't actually replace the relationship building aspect of it, because the human connection, especially nowadays where we're constantly inundated by information, having that one-on-one connection where you're not focused on pitching, you're not focused on taking from someone, actually goes a very long way. And then the last opportunity that I want to highlight is it has afforded me an opportunity to do a speaking engagement and to be a guest on other podcasts. So by intentionally building relationships with people who my values align, we're trying to create a similar impact. We're ultimately creating opportunities for us to collaborate in different ways beyond just being on my podcast as an example. So if you've ever contemplated on creating content and being vulnerable and putting yourself out there, it's absolutely worth it. But if you know anything about me, I'm not all about just the rainbows and sunshines of life. There are challenges that we end up battling with in whatever realm of life it may be. And that's why I want to share with you the 3 biggest challenges that I've encountered over this past year as I continue to create content on a consistent basis. The first one being SEO. I'm sure if you've created content on any type of platform, trying to understand the algorithm and trying to optimize your content, and then sometimes having it still fall short despite you putting in your best efforts, it absolutely sucks. Especially when you're trying to pay attention to the numbers to understand, okay, what is actually creating value? And then not having that feedback, whether it's active engagement, because again, a majority of people will passively engage with your content, and that's why this is a long game. And then that other piece of it is your stats are going to go up and down in terms of the amount of people subscribe, where they watch, where they fall off, etc. So you can do your absolute best. You can even hire someone off of Fiverr to do that SEO for you. But sometimes, unfortunately, it doesn't work. The second thing is consistency. My friends in my circle know that I am one of the most disciplined and consistent individuals that they've met, whether it's in my training as a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu athlete or it's in content creation where I've published a piece of content for every week for the past year. Where it becomes my Achilles is I can be disciplined and stick with that routine to a fault. Meaning, in the past, I would rather go down the route of burnout because I'm sticking to the principle of something that I said I would do and then follow through with it, or it's all or nothing, right? If I can't deliver at this extent, I'm not going to deliver at all. But what this past year has really taught me is that depending on your phase of life, consistency is going to look different. And if you're going to do something sustainable and if you're going to do it for the long run, you got to be okay with having the courage to take a step back, to reflect and evaluate, especially if you don't want to be caught up in society standards of what success should look like and the rate in which success should happen. And I use air quotations for those who can't see. So the moment we actually have the courage to take a step back, reflect and evaluate, and then pivot accordingly, actually serves you better, whether it's from the perspective of well-being, maybe it's from the perspective of no longer trying to fit the mold of what others expect you to do. And then it allows you to understand that for you to do more, you actually have to take something off your plate. And that's one of the best pieces of advice that one of my mentors ever gave me. It's actually twofold. The first part is, if you're going to put something on your plate, take something else off, especially if you don't want to go down the highway of expedited burnout. And having had firsthand experience of burnout in the past, I don't want to go down that route again if I don't have to. The second aspect is consistency is going to look different depending on the phase of your life. So being okay with maybe right now, consistency means I'm posting once a week. But if I want to be able to take on another project, or if I want to be able to make a certain impact in an area, and I don't want to constantly every single weekend only be editing and recording, then I'm going to utilize that opportunity to scale back, because results takes time. And like I mentioned earlier, sometimes you can put something out there and not everyone is going to engage. And it's not until later on that someone reaches out and sends you a message or leaves you a comment that it's like, you've been here my whole journey and I've never seen you, because it takes a lot for people to actively engage. And sometimes the things that we talk about in my conversations with my guests, it's challenges that they had to overcome. And if people actively engage with some of those challenges, what ends up happening is that they accidentally expose someone else that they're connected to within their network. So there's a lot of nuances that I understand, that even though sometimes I look at numbers and the algorithm and what it's telling me, and I'm actually really discouraged, I'm also reminded of the why behind this journey. I started this podcast because I wanted to help others unleash their potential and actually create meaningful success instead of defaulting to what was actually dictated for them, all while prioritizing well-being, because I've gone down that hustle culture route where I had a full-time job, a side hustle, and then was podcasting, creating content, and then I burnt out. And then after taking a year where I only worked full-time and then worked out and hung out with friends and stuff like that, then I slowly got drawn back into this entire experience. Why? Because it allows me to intentionally build relationships. It gives me the opportunity to actually design the digital footprint that I want others to be able to experience, right? Because similar to a culture in an organization, your digital footprint is either going to be designed, or it's going to happen by default, or maybe it's going to result from a disaster. So why not design it? Especially if people are going to look for social proof as to why they would want to work with you, whether it's in the corporate world, in a business sense, or again, just as an affiliate marketer potentially for their product or service. Despite the challenges, I feel like the pros of content creation and putting yourself out there and actually having a digital footprint by design and not by default is still so worth it. And it's really allowed me the opportunity to learn about myself and grow as an individual and show myself what I'm capable of, but also allows me to continue to intentionally build a community around me of individuals who are growth oriented, care about others and helping them elevate, because they understand that there's more than enough of the pie to go around in this world. And that if we actually take a moment to step back to not only have that self-awareness, self-reflection, and then we take the moment to actually connect with and elevate others, it's going to be so much more fulfilling when we take a step back and then we look back at what we've actually achieved to date. So looking forward, what you can expect, I'm going to be publishing on a bi-weekly cadence until I actually have an extra set of hands to help me, or maybe I feel like I have the capacity to actually go back to that weekly cadence. Like I said, because there are certain projects that I want to be able to help with outside of my full-time job and podcasting in itself, and that requires time that won't otherwise be afforded to me if I'm only focused on editing and recording every single weekend. And if you've tuned in for this long, Thank you so much. Your time and attention means so much to me. And stay tuned because I'm going to be intertwining interviews with solo content. And I'll go a little bit further into that in my year-end review as I share with you what it's going to look like in the beginning of the year. But it's going to be similar content in terms of I really want to focus on what does it take to unleash the potential of individuals and organizations so that they can actually achieve meaningful success, all while prioritizing well-being. And this leads me to the last part, which is the type of guests that I'm looking for. I generally look for these things in the guests that I'm looking to have on my podcast. The first one is if you're a visible minority and/or an ally who cares about helping others unleash their full potential so that they can actually achieve meaningful success while prioritizing well-being, then I want to see if there's a fit for us to collaborate. The second piece of it is if you have direct leadership experience or you're partnering with leaders and are a subject matter expert who provides value to them, then that is another criteria that I generally look for. And then willingness to be transparent and vulnerable, because when it comes to success, leadership, and self-leadership, it can be really messy. And that's the thing that I want to help others understand is that despite the fact that most social media posts online, especially Instagram, Facebook, etc., makes individuals look really polished, I am by no means anywhere near to being polished. And I am absolutely okay with that. Because I learned that the more real and raw that I can be and I have vulnerability with purpose, less I have to hide. And it creates space for others to actually be authentic as well. And when we actually create spaces like that, it allows us to make mistakes. It allows us to connect with others on a deeper level and make a deeper impact. And lastly, it's alignment with my content pillars. I cover anything from self-leadership, leadership, change management, future of work, diversity, equity, inclusion. At the end of the day, my audience is generally leaders, HR professionals, and individuals who are growth-oriented in different types of professions who want to learn and grow and figure out, okay, how do I create meaningful success for myself and learn more? Because there are so many pieces of content out there, but maybe they just resonate with one of my guests and they choose to come back. And then as for myself, if you're ever looking for a podcast guest or someone to speak on vulnerability with purpose, the power of personal branding, or even when it comes to self-leadership and the role it has in creating inclusive environments that bring the best out of people, then I might be the guest for you, especially with my squiggly line career in both the corporate space, where I've worked in over 5 different industries and I've had multiple entrepreneurial endeavors, some of which actually failed, but afforded me learning lessons that I otherwise wouldn't have access to. Then maybe it's worth a conversation. With all that being said, if you stuck around for this long, thank you so much for your time and attention. If you have any feedback in terms of what type of content resonates with you or which of my guests that were your favorite and you want to have a conversation with me, please connect with me on LinkedIn because I would be more than grateful for the opportunity to better understand what it is that you find value in. And I can't wait to stay in touch with you on my next episode because remember, my next episode is going to be the 5th episode, which is quite the milestone for a podcast.